Welcome to the Freeborn Podcast, the Romans edition, where we are going through the book of Romans and considering it from an angle that might be unique to some of you, or might be you might not have considered it this way. And we've talked about this extensively, so I'll try to not fall into the groove of hitting it again. But just for anyone joining us for the first time, I encourage you to go back and look at the first episodes. We are in episode 4 today, but you can go back and listen to the previous ones. If they're very boring, you can put them on double or triple speed, and then I'll sound like a chipmunk besides, so, like a little added bonus there. But you can go back and listen to them, and the main point that we are making with this is that we are trying to analyze the epistle to the Romans from a literary standpoint, not as evangelical scripture. Meaning not the way evangelicals typically try to study scripture, where they try to make every phrase be standalone meaningful. And particularly if you are a preacher, probably, you do this even more. You will analyze the text as from a standpoint of wanting to preach from it, and you make your points from it. And it's not that the text informs a sermon, but rather whatever it is that you are concerned with, whatever issue you find in the church, or whatever matter or concern you have in the church or in life or in the world, you read that into the text. You find what you want to find. You pull out the points you want to pull out, and you could have done that from anywhere in the Bible. There's no reason why you had to do it from that particular passage. And I say you, I'm really referring to me, but I feel more comfortable if I blame you. So I'm blaming you, but really it's me. All right. But I'm not alone. I will say that. I am in august company of people who do this. And I would strongly encourage all of you to stop doing that. As I've said before, as far as I'm concerned, if you have something you want to say, just get up and say it. Say, this isn't in the Bible. This is just something that's true, because there are things that are true that aren't in the Bible. Although everything in the Bible is true, not everything that is true is in the Bible. So you can get up and speak on, for instance, as I do, on economics, and you don't need a Bible verse to prove that. Now, the Bible does speak of a number of economic issues and makes a number of points regarding economics, which you can go into, but there are many points on economics the Bible does not get into, and that can be taught on in church as well. In fact, I think that one of the big problems in Christianity today is a dearth of economic understanding. And so I think that would be very good to be taught in church on economics and other subjects as well. So just get up and just say, I'm just going to talk about this, and you can judge this whether it's true or not. But we like to have that bulwark. We like to have that defense and say, you can't question what I'm saying because I read it in the Bible. Never mind that it wasn't actually talking at all about what I said, but I read something in the Bible that sounded a lot like what I wanted to say. All right, so we're trying not to do that. We are trying to look at the Epistle of Romans from the perspective of literature, and from the persuasion that the Apostle Paul had a message he wanted to communicate, that it was a long-form message, not contained in individual clauses or phrases or verses or what have you, but that it was long-form, and that in order to truly comprehend and understand that message, we must consider this epistle in its entirety, and we have to take it all into account as we try to comprehend what was the message that the Apostle Paul was trying to communicate. So that's how we're looking at it. And the overall way of viewing this is that Romans is written from a very unique, in a unique angle, and that angle is one of an Odyssey. And I don't know any better way to describe that. Some of you that are more articulate could give me a hand and tell me a better way to explain how I think Romans is written. But the best way I know how to explain it is that it is an Odyssey, or if we want to put it into a more common or popular way, more consumable way, we would say it's a travel log, right? That as far as the reader can tell, the author did not know exactly where he was going either. So many times the book is written with perfect knowledge, right? The author has perfect knowledge. He knows where the story is going. He knows how the characters will develop, and he knows what the end is going to be. That's how most books are written, especially informative books. But I don't think Romans is written that way. I think Romans is written as the author saying, I don't know where this is going any more than the reader does. Now, obviously, that's facetious, right? Because we know he knows where he's going, but he's writing it from the perspective of a person who doesn't know what's going to happen, doesn't know what's coming around the next turn, doesn't know what is going to develop or where the arguments are going to lead them. And that's why we have these arguments that seem open-ended, and then we have those arguments are then followed by diatribes where objections are raised by the author himself in the person of the hearer. He's putting himself in the place of the listener, saying, wait a minute now, if that's true, well then why wouldn't this extreme be true? And then he's saying, and then he gives the answer. Then he reasons that out with us. Whereas in the other books of Paul, we don't have this type of a diatribe system where he'll make a case and then bring up the devil's advocate side and then proceed to argue against it. He doesn't really do that. Here he does, and he does it many, many times. So that's the angle. How I see the angle Paul used to write Romans, which is very interesting, which means that Romans especially must be viewed on how would I put it? In a panoramic way. Must be viewed panoramically. If we try to take Romans and apply the typical evangelical treatment, right, where we cut it all up into cute phrases and then make those phrases be independently meaningful and self-contained, we are going to completely and absolutely miss the point of Romans. No doubt about that. We must approach Romans or look at Romans from a panoramic view and realize that what is said in chapter 1 is not conclusive. Chapter 2, chapter 3, however you want to divide it up, in each paragraph, each part, these are not conclusive statements. These are statements that are leading to something else. And we don't know what that is as we go, but we know it's going somewhere. Even if the author himself doesn't know where it's going, presumably, right? At least that's how he's portraying himself, as to also be discovering these things with us. But we do know it's going somewhere, and we must reserve judgment. And this is one of the interesting things that I think comes out of the diatribes that we find throughout the book. In that even the author himself realized that these statements he was making opened the door, gave license, or appeared to give license for the hearers, for the audience, to oversimplify the conclusions, to become extreme in their extrapolations and understanding of it. And so the diatribes are a constant attempt to rebalance and to bring back to the center from both sides and say, no, don't oversimplify the point. There's more to it than just that. For instance, one of the first big diatribes we find is at the end of chapter 4. Let me see here. No, the end of chapter 6. We're going to jump ahead a little bit from where we were. But in the end of chapter 6, chapter 5, let's just talk about chapter 5 just for a moment. Chapter 5 is almost entirely parenthetical. I realize that for many people, especially those who argue for original sin, or the orthodox view of original sin, Chapter 5 is one of the extreme important chapters in the entire book. It becomes the central focus for those who see it this way. And I'm not here, I have no interest in discussing or arguing on the issue of original sin. I just want to say that for many people, this chapter 5 and most of what's in it is central to their theology. And that's fine. Maybe that's actually merited and a worthy. But as far as understanding what Paul was writing about, chapter 5 is not central to the book of Romans. It is parenthetical. Almost the entire chapter is a big parenthesis, not to be dismissive of the content of that parenthesis. Some of the most interesting and intriguing parts of Paul's writings are parenthetical. For instance, Hebrews chapter 1 verses 3 through the end of the chapter is entirely a parenthesis, has no direct bearing on what Paul is talking about. He just jumps from chapter 1 verse 2 all the way to chapter 2 verse 1, and then he jumps again, and you could take and pull out of Hebrews probably, I haven't done the math on it, but I'm going to make an educated guess that you could extract out of Hebrews 60% of the book and lose nothing of the message, nothing at all. And yet you would lose all the most inspiring parts, because almost all of those are in the parentheses. So when I say that chapter 5 is parenthetical, I'm not being dismissive of the content. It's just simply that it doesn't have direct bearing on the point of Romans. So that has to be understood. So after the end of this, he makes a statement which gets him back to the actual point that he's making in chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4. And that is where we start in verse 20. Now, I got a new computer system here, so we're going to see how this works. If we have technical difficulties, then I'm sorry, but we're going to give this a shot. I'm going to hit this button here, and the Bible that I'm looking at should come up on the screen, and you should be able to see it with me. So here we go. You ready? Here we go. Don't miss it. Boom. Yes, it worked. Okay. Nice. Apparently, some of you think that I shouldn't mutter to myself while I'm doing this, that I sound like Bob Ross when I'm muttering about what I'm doing. So I'm going to try not to mutter, if that would help some of you not be, uncomfortable? Okay, verse 20. We are in chapter 5, verse 20, and he is getting back to his main point. And he says, moreover, the law entered that the offense might abound. But where sin abounded, grace did much more abound. That as sin hath reigned unto death, even so might grace reign through righteousness unto eternal life by Jesus Christ our Lord. Now, the point he's making here is that for the reasons explained previously in chapter 5, sin has abounded. And sin is not a function of the law. However, the law exacerbates sin. So that's the previous discussion that we'll look at later on. But that's a summary of what he's come to. The law did not create sin. The law is not sin. Sin existed long before the law in its full measure. However, the law exacerbated sin. And where sin was exacerbated by the law, grace abounded more. So what does that leave us? Well, put aside for a moment what that might mean. Let's just think about what comes to mind if you have not analyzed Romans, if you haven't considered Paul's doctrine on the issue, and you are reading this and you are doing it as an Odyssey as well. Too many times we are reading it and we're jumping ahead of the story, right? But you're reading this and you get to this point and it looks like Paul is saying that where there is more sin, there's more grace. More sin, more grace. More sin, more grace. Well, the objection, or false conclusion, depending on how you look at it, that is going to arise from that statement, the exaggeration that this statement is likely to produce, right, is what? Well, that's the diatribe that comes in chapter 6, verse 1. What shall we say then? Shall we continue in sin that grace may abound? You see, Paul, what he's doing here? Never put aside whatever this might mean and just consider how he's writing this. Let's try this. There we go. Let's consider how he's writing this. When he writes this, he has made a statement, a strong statement that could easily be misunderstood. We know that because immediately he tries to pull back the listener without compromising the difficult statement he's made. So he's made a statement that could be misunderstood. It could be misapplied. It could be exaggerated to mean something he didn't want it to mean. And rather than temper his statement, or rather than make his statement excuse it or apologize for it, what he does is he does the devil's advocate, right? He puts out the diatribe and says, what about those that would take this and try to say by this that we should continue in sin then, because where there's more sin, there's more grace. So we should sin more so there can be more grace. And then he says, God forbid. Now, just to be clear, I know this is off topic, but we also in this study discuss the issue of Bible translations. It's an issue that I have been thinking about and studying about for a while now, and so my mind goes there. But this is important here, I think, for those that are very strong KJV onlyists. This is one of these places where you're going to have to. Some of you, not all of you, some of you are moderate or well reasoned or well informed. But those of you that are not well informed and believe that every single word of the King James Bible was written in the original text as you have it here, that there's no interpretation, that there's none of that, this is a good place for you to take a look into. Verse 2 says, the first two words in English is, in the KJV, God forbid. Neither one of those words appear in any Greek manuscript ever in history. It has another word, has another phrase, an idiom that translated means what God forbid means, kind of. There's other ways we could translate that idiom, but the Greek phrase for that is "let it not be so." Would be more of a literal translation. In fact, I think the NASV translates it that way. Let it not be so, which is a very literal translation. And so, that's fine, but it doesn't really have the impact that the Greek phrase has, because in the Greek, that's not it's not a set of words. It's not a series of words. It's actually an idiom. You have to understand all the words together. And one way that you could say that in English would be heavens no. Or if you wanted to be vulgar, you could say hell no. The KJV translators, and this might be Tyndale. I'd have to look that up, but if I had to guess, I would say this is actually Tyndale's genius that we're looking at. And it is genius, right? He coined this phrase. As far as I know, he coined the phrase, or pretty sure it was Tyndale. God forbid. And that is not meant to be taken as a literal translation of the text. The word God is not there. There is no theos in the Greek. Forbid is not there. But that conveys, as an idiom, it conveys the meaning that we are looking for. And that is no, never, absolutely not would be another idiom, right? That's the one more common today. Today you don't hear people walk around saying, should you, God forbid. No, we would say absolutely not, right? No way. That would be another idiom we could use, and it would all be exactly the same. There would be it would be no less of a good translation for it to say absolutely not, or no way, heavens no, any of those would work as well. But God forbid is great. I think it's really good one. It just isn't current, right? So if you were to make a translation today, I'd probably not use that phrase to do it. Anyways, enough of the Bible translation discussion. So back to where we are. He says, God forbid. And now he's going to go on, and we're not going to get into this because we'll get back to this in 6. But notice here, he's going to go on and try to give an argument to balance what he has said. This is not to say that what he had said previously was wrong or was problematic. But what it means is that it is that truth is complex, and that simple-minded people will often take statements of truth out of context and exaggerate them for their own means and purposes. And Romans is particularly susceptible to this type of interpretation. How do we know this? We know this because Paul was aware of that as well, because he continually, through the book of Romans, does this exact same thing, makes a strong statement, and then provides the devil's advocate or the diatribe that would be used against it or in light of it, and then proceeds to balance it or to navigate the two or to reconcile the different truths that are out there. So this is how Romans is written. And as I've said in the first episode of this, I believe it was in the first episode, we talked about this, that not only is that important as a balancing feature where Paul is showing that these are truths that must be held in tension and balanced and seen from all sides, but it also is important because these questions that Paul raises also tell us how he saw what he was saying. So how do we know that what he's saying here is that where there is more sin, there is actually more grace, that we really are understanding that statement properly? Because it'd be easy to say, no. That cannot be what he's saying. It cannot be true that in order to have more grace, there must be more sin. We must be misunderstanding it. How do we know we're not misunderstanding it? Because Paul says, you're understanding it right, but you're coming to the wrong conclusion based on that. And here, it may not be quite as impactful or quite as meaningful that how Paul uses the diatribe to assure us that we really have understood what he's saying. But in the other diatribes, especially those that pertain to the law, very important to realize that when Paul makes a statement about the law that appears to be saying something absolutely unacceptable, he then gives the diatribe, which basically he says, no, that's exactly what I'm saying. But it's not all that I'm saying. I am saying that, but it's not everything I'm saying. And I point this out because too often people who read and study Romans will assume that Paul is not saying the things he's saying, particularly those who are law keepers or law respecters. They will default, they will assume that they simply are not understanding, or that someone else, that I'm not understanding. They maybe don't assume they're not understanding. They assume they do understand, but they assume that I'm not understanding how Paul is really meaning to be understood. I'm just not fully comprehending that, right? And that's why the way he wrote this is so critical, because these diatribes are Paul saying, now let me take the other side, let me play the devil's advocate, and then let me explain the two truths together and put them into harmony, right? But by doing that, he is affirming that as you understood it, and it seemed impossible to mean that, that is precisely what he meant, because he never says, that's not what I meant to say. I know that's how it could be understood, but that's not what I meant to say. He never does that. His devil's advocate, his diatribe, they always are of the same pattern. I said that. That's exactly what I meant to say. It could be misunderstood. It could be it could be misconstrued. It could be misapplied. And if you misapply it, you're going to come up with this false conclusion, because here is the reason why we can't reach that conclusion, even though that statement meant exactly what I said. So that's why the way we look at Romans is very important, and we have to take and analyze these diatribes, these devil advocate positions that he does, because they are the negative space of Romans, where Paul not only has made a positive affirmation of a truth, but in the diatribe, he paints the negative space around it and says, that's exactly what I meant to outline, because I'm going to fill in all the background around the outline, and I'm not going to color past the lines, and you're going to see both by what I drew and the background that I painted that that's exactly what I meant to say. And you're understanding me properly. So very important there. All right. Let's talk about chapter 5 for a moment. A little bit about the content of it. Again, like I said, chapter 5 is largely parenthetical. He goes in and deals at great length with the idea of the offense coming by one. So, and at the same time, just as the offense comes by one, the gift comes by one, and he shows that parallelism between these two concepts, and that the offense has come through Adam, the gift has come through Jesus Christ, and he goes through that. What I would like to consider in this long parenthetical explanation is a couple minor points that are not connected to the main topic of Romans, or the main subject of Romans, but I think are important because they're so given to misunderstanding. I find many people misunderstand the points that are being made here, or the subjects that these points relate to. One of those is where he says in chapter 5, let me put it up here for you. Chapter 5, let me find where I'm looking for. Oh, maybe it's not 5. Give me 1 second. Yes, chapter 4. Sorry, chapter 4. We're back in chapter 4. No, we are in chapter 5. Boy, I'm lost all over the place. Okay, chapter 5, and we are looking at, let's look at from verse 6. He says here that for scarcely for a righteous man will one die, yet peradventure for a good man some would even dare to die. But God commended his love toward us, in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. So obviously the point here he's making is the depth and the meaning, the significance of the love of Jesus Christ, in that Christ died for sinners. That's an amazing statement. And the way Paul contrasts the amazing statement that this is that he says that people would be willing, human beings, people you and I know might on the off chance might be willing to die for a righteous man. But for a good man, a good number of people, not just one or two on the off chance, but there's a good chance that a number of people will be willing to die for the good man. Now, the point that I think you should consider here is that Paul he's not trying to teach this. This isn't like the point of Romans. This isn't how Romans should be analyzed at all. But he is assuming a truth or a fact to be true, an opinion to be true. Maybe that's the best way to say it. He's assuming this issue to be true and understood by everybody. And that is that being good is of higher order than being righteous. Now, this is indirectly related and important to the book of Romans. It's not the direct message, and it's not being stated here as a doctrinal teaching. It's being stated as simply a matter of fact. It's almost as if saying the sky is blue and grass is green. That's not a doctrinal statement. It's just simply a statement that everyone accepts as being true. That's what he's saying here. But this is what he is saying that everyone accepts as being true. That being good is more worthy, is of a higher order than being righteous. That is why more people would be more willing to lay their life down to save a good man than they would to save a righteous man. A few might, perhaps, on the off chance, might give their life to save a righteous man. But there would be more of them who would be more willing, more often, to give their life for a good man. That's the statement that he makes, right? And if you read and analyze the language and how he's saying it and the grammar of it, that's the statement he's making. He's building that up. And then he's saying, but Christ gave his life not for a good man, or not for a righteous man, I should say, and not even for a good man. Rather, he gave his life for a sinner, for many sinners. Why is this important? Because remember that Romans, in chapter 1, we found that Romans, the point of Romans, or the thesis, I should say, of Romans is that that we're going to analyze the gospel of Jesus Christ. Because in the gospel of Christ, the righteousness of God is revealed. Now, we've already talked about this and how when he says that the righteousness of God is revealed, what we discover as we read the book is that we are the righteousness of God that's revealed, right? That's the big surprise. That's the twist of the story, right? That's the surprise ending in a sense. And I kind of, I should have put spoiler alert on that, because if you haven't really read through Romans this way, you may not have noticed this. And so that's the spoiler of Romans, is when he says, hey, we're going to look at the gospel of Jesus Christ, and there is going to be this conclusion that we're going to get to. There's going to be this glorious ending. The righteousness of God is going to be revealed. And we're all looking around. Where is it? Where is it? And then what we find as we read through the book, all of a sudden we realize the righteousness of God that's revealed is us, is those who believe. It's in us, on us, around us. We are God's righteousness. But we're not good. Righteous, yes. Everyone who is of the faith of Christ is righteous, but not good. That's critical to understand. Remember when that rich man comes to Jesus and says, good master, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus' response to him is, why do you call me good? There's only one good. That's God. That is the context, the intellectual background that is the tapestry of this statement that Paul makes, that he's just assuming that we all understand. Now, I have found that we do not all understand this. This has been lost, and we have a different way of ordering or valuing what's more important. And so we would put good, righteous, perfect, right? That would be our order. And so someone who's perfect, God's perfect. I'm not perfect. I'm a good guy. I'm a good person, but I'm not perfect. And we would put it in that order. And I'm not, as I've said many times, I am not trying to be the word Nazi. I'm not trying to be the dictionary enforcer on anyone. I understand we use language differently, in a common sense, in our vernacular, than how it's used, how the language was used in the time of the apostles, or how it's used in the Bible that we read in our translation, and that's fine. But what that means is we have to have a translation layer, right, between our way that we use the language and the way in which the Bible uses the language. It's okay to say, I'm not perfect. He's a good man. Nobody's perfect. And I understand exactly what you're trying to say, and it's a perfectly legitimate expression. But it's not a biblical expression, right? And so what does that mean? Well, that means that when you go to try to reconcile what you're saying with how the Bible expresses a similar idea, you have to understand that there is going to be a layer of translation between those. You cannot get around that. And what too many times happens is that people try to force their vernacular onto the Bible. And this is what happens in situations like this one. And why this verse is often, this phrase is often, this statement is so often misunderstood. Because they're trying to force the modern vernacular of good and righteous, and we can throw perfect in there even though it doesn't appear in the text here, but they want to throw that onto this. They want to bolt it on, and then they wonder why the holes aren't lining up, right? And things aren't working right. So that's the problem. They're to use a car analogy, they want to take the wheels off of a Ford and they want to bolt them on a Ferrari. And then they wonder why things aren't working. So that's why. So in the biblical terminology, right? And you don't have to talk this way in your everyday life, but it's like a doctor. A doctor, when he's talking in his everyday life, would not use medical terminology unless he just got out of medical school and he's basically pompous and insufferable, right? But a down-to-earth doctor is not going to come out and talk to his neighbor out in the yard in his bathrobe while he's watering the bushes and talk about, hematomas and vascular this and whatever that and use all his medical jargon. He's going to talk about catching a cold and a bruise and things of the sort. But he's not going to take the common vernacular and the neighborhood jargon and go back and try to bolt that onto the medical books where he gets his medical information in order to treat his neighbor. That will be a different set of vocabulary, right? And that's how we have to be. We can use our common everyday vernacular and our Christian jargon to make things clear, and people can understand us better that way. But when we go back, especially in a scholarly way, and research the scriptures, we have to put aside the common vernacular, and we have to comprehend what it's saying in the context of how it uses that terminology. And the biblical use of this terminology is that the highest possible virtue is to be good. There's nothing higher. That's higher than perfection. That's higher than righteousness. That's higher than justified. There's nothing higher than to be good. That is the absolute highest order. And righteousness falls way below that. Far, far below being good. And even righteousness is far above us, but far below being good. And perfection, well, that's even further down. Perfection isn't even in the same category, actually, right? We can compare righteousness and goodness and see that righteousness falls so far short of goodness, right? But perfection isn't only less than righteousness and goodness. It's not even in the same category. We're not even talking about the same thing. So that's what's important there to understand in chapter 5. And maybe, I hope, that will help you comprehend a little better what this all what he meant, what he's meaning to say in this statement that he makes. Other than the fact that the book of Romans is dealing with the righteousness of God that's going to be revealed, and we're talking about who might be a righteous man. Other than that, this doesn't actually have any direct implications on the subject of the book of Romans, on the main point. In fact, most of this has very little direct connection to it. And so if you were trying to understand Romans, you could basically skip from chapter 5, verse 2, sort of, somewhere in verse 2. You could skip and just cut out all the way down to all the way basically to the end of chapter 5, to where we started reading in verse 20. So the first from 2 to 20, the first 18 of the first 20 verses, or 17 of the first 19 verses, I should say, you could just cut them out. And as far as understanding the main point, the central point of Romans, wouldn't make any difference. I'm not saying there's no bearing on it. It has some, but it is very, very minor to what the actual book of Romans is saying. Now, it does recycle a number or move into place. I wouldn't say recycle. That's not the right word, but it does, how would I put it? Put into play a number of concepts that are central to the book of Romans. For instance, grace, righteousness, wrath. These are central components to the main point of Romans, but it's very tangential that he's dealing with this. This is tangential. Now there is one point that I do think that he's making in chapter 5 that is important, and that he is establishing that sin, the existence of sin, cannot be laid at the feet of the law. And this is critical because he has appeared to have said, and he will appear to say, right, that the law is the strength of sin. That without the law, sin is dead. Sin has no power without the law, and yet it does exist without the law. And this is the point that he is, in so much as chapter 5, these 18 or 17 verses of chapter 5 do pertain to the epistle of Romans. They do so in that it is making that point. Where does sin come from? Because in the end of chapter 3, he made a statement that he kind of appears to have left standing. I'll put this up here. He appears to have just kind of left that sitting there, right? It's another one of these things where he makes a statement and then we move on and we're not sure where the statement's going. Do we then, in verse 31 of chapter 3, the very end of chapter 3, do we then make void the law? I'll highlight it here for you. Do we then make void the law through faith? God forbid. Yea, we establish the law. Why would he say that? Why would he ask that question? This goes back to what we said. Why would he ask that question? If he is not making statements that could easily be understood and taken to the extreme of saying that we are nullifying the law. See, people that are law keepers and law respecters want to interpret Romans as if Paul is not saying anything like that. Yet he's obviously saying something like that. He says that. So does that mean that we're going to nullify the law? No. We're going to establish the law. Now, you would think that the very next statement would be to proceed to establish the law. But he doesn't really do that. In fact, he does more of the opposite in a way, right? Explaining how Abraham is justified without the law and that those of the laws are not heirs. And it appears, so that's why he's saying, we're going to establish the law. But then he proceeds to say more of what seems to be saying that we're not establishing the law, we're nullifying the law. Anyway, going back to what I was saying on chapter 5, he's going to deal with those things. But here's where he wants to slowly, I think, slowly and subtly start establishing the law. getting its legs under it, so to speak. And that is, he is going to make the case that sin, while it is powerless without the law, which is why the law must be dealt with the way it's dealt with in Romans, because the law is the strength of sin. But while that's true, the law is not the source of sin. Nobody's a sinner because of the law. That's not true. The law is not the source of sin. And the point that he wants to draw out in 5 is, what is the source of sin? Where does it come from? And while he's doing that, he goes ahead and gives the contrast to that, and that is, what is the source of righteousness? Because that also ties into what he's saying, right? The righteousness of God is going to be revealed. How is it going to be revealed? What is the mechanism by which it's revealed? Well, he shows that it bears a striking similarity to the mechanism by which the sin was revealed. Sin came into existence through Adam. Righteousness comes into existence through Jesus Christ. Sin comes through people, comes through Adam and on to all people. So does the righteousness of Jesus Christ. And so that's the point he's making. So in that way, chapter 5 obviously fits in. I don't want to make it sound like I'm saying chapter 5 is completely pointless. No, not at all. I'm just saying it is not elemental to understanding the central thesis of Romans. But it is elemental, it is critical in understanding the details of that issue, and he's working out some of the main points. So that is how chapter 5 should be analyzed and looked at. But we are not going to get into the particulars of chapter 5, especially those first from verses 2 through verse 19, because they don't have enough bearing on the overall point yet. Maybe we'll go back later and look at it when we're looking at more in detail some of the things that are being stated here in this epistle. Okay. One more thing on chapter 5, and that is, once he's made this statement of where sin is coming from, now he's ready to establish a point, and that's verse 20. He says, moreover, meaning, right, and additionally, more to the point would be another way of saying this. So sin came from Adam. However, or moreover, even more so now, more importantly, or more to the point, the law entered that the offense might abound. So the offense is there not because of the law, but what impact did the law have on sin? We've established that it did not introduce sin. But what impact does the law have on existing sin? Now, there is no doubt, and he's established this also previously. There's no doubt that sin preceded the law. The law was not there, and then sin came along afterwards. The law is reactionary. All law is reactionary. This is one of the central problems with the law. One of the key issues with the law is that it's always too late. We make laws once sins have already been committed. We don't sit around thinking of what crimes might be committed and then write laws against such imaginary crimes. Rather, we look at sins or crimes that already are being committed and react to them by legislating against them. Right? So that's a problem with the law, and there's no way around that. There's just no way around that. That is one of the, if not the first problem of the law. If you were to make a list of all the problems in the law, number one problem is the law is reactionary, which means once the law exists, it is too late to do anything about it. That's why the law, even though the nominal intent of the law is righteousness, the actual experience, the actual result of law is condemnation. It's not meant to condemn. It's not the intent of the law to make everyone condemned. It is the result of the law. But why is that? What makes something that's intended to life result in condemnation, wrath, and death? Well, the nature of the law, that it is reactionary, that it comes in after the sin has been committed, and therefore cannot prevent the sin. The only way in which the law could result in life in a practical or real or actual way is if it prevented sin. Because the law, and this is another, maybe would be number 2 on the list of problems in the law provides no solution to sin, right? Provides no solution to sin. This is critical also. It's reactionary, and it provides no solution once sin has been committed. So the law comes in, allegedly or nominally, for life, looks out on the scene of humanity, and what does it find according to Romans 1 and 2 and 3? Everyone's already wicked. And where it was intended, it came with bells and whistles on to grant life. It comes into a actual scenario where there is none good, no, not one, and all that is left it can do is to condemn. That is the situation of the law. It is the situation of all law. It is the problem with the law. It is the flaw in the law. And so this is what he's saying. The law did not create sin, but the law made sin abound. It made it worse. It didn't make things better. The law has never made anything better. This is basically the statement of Hebrews. The law has never made anything better. The new covenant made things better. The law has never made anything better. It has never fixed anything. It doesn't have the power to fix. This is critical to understand why Paul says what he says about the law. The law does not have the power to fix you. The law draws a line and empowers nobody to adhere to it. The law establishes the steps to life, but it cannot heal your paralyzed legs to walk up them. It points out the path to life, but it cannot turn your heart towards it. And when it finds you rebellious, when it finds you wicked and evil, the law has no contingency plan. What does the law say? And Paul points this out later on. What does the law say? He who does these things will live in them. That's it. No contingency plan. Compare that word of the law to the word of faith. That's in Romans chapter 10, and we'll get to that. But if you want to jump ahead, you shouldn't. Don't do that. But if you want to, Romans chapter 10, he contrasts the word of the law with the word of faith. And one of the salient points that he makes is that the word of the law has no contingency plan. If you do not keep the law makes your sin worse than it would have been. All right. So he says, The law entered that the offense might abound, but where sin abounded, grace did much more abound. And that is also very important to the understanding of what he's going to say here. That there's something that supersedes law. And sin is the great demarcator between what the law is in actuality and what grace is in actuality. And these do not mix. We are out of time, really, and so we probably shouldn't get much more into that. We should probably leave that for later. I will not be here next week. For the 3 listeners that tune in to me and listen to me rant or wander or ramble, depending on your perspective, I won't be here next week. I'm sorry. You can screenshot me right now, and then hold it close to your heart next week so that you're not too sad. I should be back in 2 weeks, 2 weeks from today, for another riveting edition of Romans. Thanks for being with me. It was great spending this time with you. I enjoy Romans. I hope you do too. I encourage you to read it. Read it as literature. Have a great night.